Hi, friends. It's Mr. Rogers, and we're going to go over carbohydrates. This is going to take about 10 to 15 minutes ish. And what I kind of want us to do is you're going to listen to the first part. You're going to kind of just like hang out and listen to everything I say. And then we're going to go through and do the notes together, if that makes sense. And so please, please, please make sure you're listening. I want to make sure that you get some things. I want to say some things that are kind of important. And then we're going to reaffirm those through notes. So this is kind of a look onto my screen from earlier this week, and we can kind of see monomers and polymers here. For carbohydrates, the monomer is almost always going to be glucose, and how we connect those glucoses together will actually create the polymer that is useful. And so, for example, here you can see that they're connected from one side of the sixth ring to the other side of the sixth ring, and kind of a diagonal look. This looks a lot like cellulose looks. And it just, we could also connect these Legos in a different way. And depending on how you connect these together, creates different materials. Okay. So with carbohydrates, the word carbohydrate, carbo means carbon, hydrate means water. And that kind of tells you what carbohydrates contain. They contain carbon and then hydrogen and oxygen. That's it. There's very few carbohydrates that have anything different. In 10th grade, we're just going to say that all carbohydrates have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay. They always have it in a similar setup. And we'll write this in our notes that almost all carbohydrates follow the setup of CH2O. So carbon, water. And what I mean by that is kind of like a math class where you can reduce things down. Almost all carbohydrates can reduce down to CH2O. So, for example, glucose is C6H12O6, 6 carbons, 6 oxygens, 12 hydrogens. If I use the common factor there, which is 6, and I divide it down, it becomes CH2O. C6H12O6 divided by 6 is CH2O. All carbohydrates have that kind of breakdown, and they're all going to be broken down easily into carbon water. Okay? So the main job of carbohydrates, the one that we're going to star on our notes, and it's the main thing, that's the thing that all carbohydrates are kind of used for in all living things, is they're all going to be used for energy. Okay? They're our gasoline of our cells. We're going to take carbohydrates and use them to produce energy for us to actually use. Kind of like a car. You put gasoline into a car, you use the gasoline to actually make you move. We're going to use this gasoline of sugar to make us move. Now, there are some other important uses of carbohydrates. The most famous one is cellulose. Cellulose is actually the most common organic material on the face of Earth. There's more cellulose by weight than anything else that's organic material. And that's because it's found in all plant cell walls. And what is fascinating by cellulose, and maybe I get a little too into this compared to other people, but cellulose is unable to be broken down by most living things. Cellulose is one of the strongest things on Earth that's organic. And we even copied its structure to make bulletproof vests. It is super strong. You can't break it down. And so what your body does to it, well, with anything it can't break down, your body has to make a choice. It's going to say, do I throw this up, or do I make this pass through my system as fast as possible? For the most part, cellulose is pretty benign. Your body just says, get it through. And it makes you go to the bathroom, which is pretty good, especially for old people. And we have another name for this, by the way. Cellulose is called fiber. And you might have heard about fiber before. And fiber, obviously, that's the job of fiber, is to make people go to the bathroom more regularly and to have more consistent stool. Fun times. Never think you'd be talking about stool over webcams. Besides that, we have monosaccharides. Saccharide is a Latin word for sugar. So monosaccharides is kind of another word for monomer. And we have polysaccharides, which, again, means many sugars. It's kind of another word for polymer. And they're kind of just designated for carbohydrates. And so sometimes people will use those. I kind of go with monomer, polymer this whole time, but I just want to make sure that you guys hear all the verbiage that you could possibly hear or see in the world with biology. And sometimes people use monosaccharide and polysaccharides. So monosaccharides almost always are glucose. Sometimes you'll see a fructose in there. Sometimes you'll see a ribose, but for the most part, we're always going to be talking about glucose, and how we're going to connect these glucoses together is going to make different things. And so the examples are on the left there. So sugars are basic carbohydrates. Glucose is one of them. Another famous one you guys have heard of before is fructose. Sucrose is another one. It's a basic sugar. Sucrose is actually technically something called a disaccharide, meaning two. So it's actually two things connected together. It's a glucose and a fructose connected together as a sucrose. And so basic sugars, we have starches, which the technical term for a starch is amylose. And starch is used in plant cells as glucose storage. And so you might not need to use all your glucose all at once. And so what a plant does is it stores its extra glucoses in its root cells or other storage cells as starch for it to be used later. And this storage in plants works pretty well. We sometimes eat plants that have big storages of starch. Like that's what a potato is. You're eating its reserved glucoses. That's why it's so starchy. And so that it's storage of glucoses. Cellulose, like I already talked about, that's actually a structural component. There's actually an animal structural component that's like cellulose. It's called chitin. It's found in insects and crabs and lobsters. We use it for an exoskeleton in animals. So there's actually a animal version of cellulose, but cellulose is really only found in plants. And then glycogen. Glycogen is the animal version of starch. So you have glycogen inside of you. So right now, you eat something, say it has sugar in it, and if your body's like, hey, yo, I don't need all this sugar all at once, it turns the glucoses into glycogen. That glycogen hangs out in your liver and hangs out in your muscle cells and is kind of waiting to be used. Now, it doesn't wait forever. Glycogen has a half-life of about 48 hours to 72 hours. So if you don't use your glycogen in about 72 hours, it converts to fats, and that's long-term storage of carbohydrates. So glycogen is kind of like a temporary storage. And if you don't end up using your glycogen, it turns into fat inside your body. So carbohydrates, main source of usable chemical energy for cells. Can also be used for structure in some living things, mostly just plants. There's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides mean one sugar, disaccharides mean two sugar, polysaccharides mean many sugars, and then always contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the kind of basic formula of carbon water, CH2O, and how you go up, like fructose is C5H10O5, glucose is C6H12O6, that type of thing. And then we have some examples. The last thing, before I forget, because I'll put it in our notes too, is anytime you see the ending OSE, 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 that is Latin for sugar. So I could see a word that I have no idea about, like maltose. Maltose is two glucoses connected together, but you wouldn't know that. You just see the word maltose. Okay. Well, just seeing the OSE, I know it's a carbohydrate right away. It's a carbohydrate right away. Okay. So we got one more slide here. I just want to make sure I hit this home really, really, really well, is that glucose is always going to be the monomer for carbohydrates, and how you connect these monomers together make different polymers. So for example, this right here is cellulose, and how I connect them, like on this diagonal like this, makes cellulose. If I connect it like this with these little like folds right here and then kind of like layered, that's starch. Same Legos, same basic Legos, but connected differently make two very different things. We can eat this. Realistically, it's delicious. We can eat this, but we can't break it down. We can't use it. And that's just how you connect these Legos together. That's it. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So let's take some actual paper notes. And so we have here the webcam up, and you guys can see my desk. Isn't it a beautiful fake wood grain here? So we're going to use our note sheet. Our note sheet, if you don't have one, is just 4 squares And so I'll make one really quick here. And I'll just have us be focused on one to make sure that it fits on the actual piece of paper. Okay. And in the middle here, there was a circle. Well, I think there's 2 circles. Oh no, is my pen dead? Oh no. The problems of recording, right? So there's a circle there and there's a circle there. The circle in the middle has macromolecules. This is carbohydrates. So let's go through and add everything we need to make sure that we are good with these notes. First thing is carbo means carbon. Hydrate equals water. So carbohydrates have CHO, and it's almost always in the structure of CH2O. Carbon, water, carbohydrate, carbon, water, C, water. Okay? Now, other things that we kind of need to know. One thing I kind of forgot to bring up, and it's super important because, you just forget things, is carbohydrates are polar. Kind of makes sense since to be polar, you have to like water. And I literally just told you carbohydrates is carbon, water. So it's a polar thing. These are very, very polar. Another thing that's super important and we want to star is what carbohydrates are mostly used for, and that's energy for the cell. So it's basic energy for the cell. Okay, so that's super important. We want to make sure that we got that. Other things that I think are really important that we want to make sure, always remember OSE means sugar. So the suffix OSE means sugar. So anytime you see OSE at the end of a word, it's a sugar. Okay. And then I think monosaccharide is important to write down. And then we had disaccharide. That wasn't even on our notes, but I brought it up. And then poly. So saccharide means sugar. Mono meaning one, so one sugar. Disaccharide means di, two sugar, 2 sugars. Poly, many sugars. Okay. All right. And then let's talk about the different kinds of sugars. So I'm going to do animal over here. Do plants over here. These are all made with glucose. So glucose is the monomer for all of these things. It's the monosaccharide for all of these. And we're going to connect glucose in different ways. So the first way we can connect glucose in humans is glycogen. Glycogen does not actually have a scientific name with the OSE at the end, which kind of blows up this whole idea up here. But I swear this is the only one I know of that doesn't have official sugar name. And it probably does. I just don't know it. We just call it glycogen. Okay. So glycogen is a bunch of just glucoses connected together used for storage. So if you don't use all your glucoses after eating, you store it as glycogen first, then you eventually make fat from it. Okay. And then another animal one I said was chitin. Chitin is, again, another one that doesn't have OSE. There is a scientific name for chitin with OSE at the end. It's not that important. I really don't care. But chitin is going to be used for structure. And I want to put insects and crabs. Went over my line. That's not great. Okay, so chitin is a hard kind of like cellulose structure. It is breakable. We can actually technically break down chitin, but it's a struggle for us. So next time you eat a grasshopper or something like that, just know you are breaking down its outer belly or outer skeleton for food and energy. I know you guys have always wondered how much energy you're getting out of your grasshoppers when you eat them. Plants. We have the same kind of idea. We have starch. The technical term for starch is amylose. Like I don't know if I said it or not because I've recorded this like 3 times now unsuccessfully, but amylose, we actually do a lab in class usually for amylose. We spit in cups and we put starch inside those cups. Your spit has a enzyme that breaks down amylose before it even gets to your stomach, and it breaks amylose right down into glucose because that's what our body's going to use. And so we can't do that lab right now because spitting in cups doesn't seem very COVID safe. So starch, amylose, this is storage. It's just like our glycogen inside of plants. And then they have cellulose as well. Or not as well, but they have cellulose. We talked about that. And that is their structure. So these are our notes for carbohydrates. We're going to do one of these for every single one of the macromolecules. So carbohydrates, they're polar. They're energy for the cell mostly. They can use for structure as well, like chitin and cellulose, but for the most part, they're just energy for the cell. That's what our bodies and cells are going to use them for. Carbohydrate means carbon water. They have CHO in them, and it kind of always follows the formula of CH2O. If you ever see anything end in OSE, like cellulose, amylose, glucose, fructose, they are all sugars. There are monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, one sugar, two sugars, many sugars. And always remember, this is a good one, that's why we talk about it first. All macromolecules are made with monomers being the base, and you connect a bunch of monomers together to make polymers. This is a good example. The monomer is glucose here, and we connect it differently and different living things to make all of these things down here. Okay, it's using the same Lego block, but just connecting them differently creates all these things. So I hope this was good notes. I hope it actually worked this time. Let me know if it doesn't. I'll talk to you guys later.